Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you. Viewers, today's episode is 236, Engine Shutdown. So, what are the odds of winning lottery? The odds of winning a typical national lottery are 1 in 100 million. But we all think we're going to win, don't we? What are the odds of experiencing a single engine shutdown in a 10-hour long haul flight on a 787 with Gen X 1B engines? The odds are 1 in a million. You would return to the departure airport and land safely. In 14 years of service, there have been 5 single-engine shutdowns on a 787 with Gen X 1B engines until the 12th of June 2025, all without a single fatality or injury. Now, we're showing a table of the 5 events prior to the Air India crash on the 12th of June, and then including the tragic crash. 2 were technical problems with oil system. 1 was due to an ice event. 1 was a turbine blade failure. On 4 occasions, the engine was shut down by the pilot. 1 was an uncommanded engine shutdown, and it was traced to a maintenance error. Richard, so what are the odds of experiencing a 2-engine shutdown on takeoff?
Oh, the odds of 1 engine failure, 1 in a million, and the odds of 2 engine failures for 2 completely different reasons are 1 in a million. Some people call that a billion in some countries or a trillion in other countries. It's a big number, whatever it is. And the odds of 2 engine failures for the same common cause are, however, only 1 in a million. And 1 in a million can happen 5 times in 14 years, a total of 27 million flight hours for the Boeing 787 and the Gen X 1B engines. The engines have a total of 54 million engine hours on the Boeing 787. Obviously, you have 2 engines on each aircraft. So in a 1 in a million, well, it can happen, but it is so improbable that it has never happened in aviation history, and it is not considered a realistic risk. It's like trying to flip a fair coin 40 times in a row and getting 40 times heads. Or it's like winning the lottery 10,000 times over. So what we're doing is looking for a common cause for a dual engine shutdown in the case of Air India 171.
So, Richard, many believe that the common cause is the captain switching off the fuel. Many experts are saying this is a criminal investigation. The real issue is pilot mental health, and this was a deliberate act by the pilot, like Silk Air or Egypt Air or German Wings.
Yeah. If the captain wanted to deliberately crash the aircraft, and this was a criminal act, then why were both engines successfully relit? Why was there an attempt to land on a road? And why try to glide as far as possible? If the pilot was the common cause by switching the fuel to cutoff, why does the report say that the maximum speed happened before the fuel switches were even touched? I think the pilots were trying to save the aircraft.
Has such an event happened before, a dual engine shutdown after takeoff?
Yes, it has. And the US Airways Flight 1549, the so-called Miracle on the Hudson River, experienced a dual engine shutdown due to a bird strike hit a whole flock of geese, and that caused both engines to stall and shut down. And that happened, however, at an altitude of 2,800 feet and 90 seconds after takeoff. So there was more height and more time.
So was the common cause in the case of Air India Flight 171 a bird strike causing both engines to shut down? I think not.
Well, the preliminary report states there was no significant bird activity observed in the vicinity of the flight path. And I went back through the CCTV footage. We have from footage from two different cameras and two different angles. And they don't show any evidence of significant bird activity in the vicinity of the runway or during the initial climb. There are three isolated birds to be seen in figure 15 in the preliminary report, but they are all well away from the crash aircraft. So I think a bird strike can be ruled out for as a dual engine failure.
So we've dismissed the bird strike, but some of our viewers have also talked about fuel contamination as a common cause. Your thoughts on
Yeah.
that, Richard?
Well, fuel samples were taken from the bowsers and tanks used to refuel the aircraft, and they were tested at the DGCA's lab and found satisfactory. That's recorded in the preliminary report. And they go on that very limited amount of fuel samples could be retrieved from the APU filter and from the refuel jettison valve on the left wing. And they're testing these samples, and it will be done at a suitable facility capable of carrying out such a test with a very limited available quantity. So, since we haven't heard anything more on fuel from the DGCA or from the AAIB, I think we can rule out fuel contamination.
So if we exclude pilot error, bird strike and fuel contamination, which we've done many times, and we know the engines were not damaged and successfully relit, what are we left with?
Yeah, well, what we're left with is something like a replay of the incident from our table on the 4th of August 2023, when an Air India Boeing 787-8, the registration VTANW, experienced an uncommanded engine shutdown 9 minutes after takeoff in Mumbai. And the cause was traced back to a maintenance error 5 years previously in 2018. And the big difference this time is the maintenance error caused a dual engine shutdown and not a single engine shutdown on takeoff.
Very interesting. But the pilots, of course, are trained to deal with engine failure both before and after takeoff.
Yeah, that's correct. And during the takeoff roll, cockpit crews use standard speed callouts to monitor acceleration, confirm performance, and support the decision making if an engine fails or another emergency occurs. Then they can call out RTO to reject takeoff. And these call-outs vary slightly from airline to airline, and their standard operating procedures and aircraft type. But generally, the sequence is you set the thrust, pilot flying, check thrust, and the pilot monitoring thrust set. Then there's an 80 knot call out. The pilot monitoring will call 80 knots, and the pilot flying will say checked. And then there's the V1, which is the decision speed. At V1 or before, you can reject a takeoff. So the pilot monitoring will call V1. And then there's the rotation speed, VR, and the pilot monitoring calls rotate, and the pilot flying will then rotate the aircraft. And some SOPs also have the PM, the pilot monitoring, calling V2. That's the takeoff safety speed, the minimum speed to be achieved with one engine inoperative. And then the pilot monitoring will call positive rate, and the pilot flying will call gear up. Now, on Air India Flight 171, the preliminary report states that V1 was calculated at 153 knots IAS, and this was achieved at 08:08:33 UTC. And the aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff at 08:08:39 UTC, 6 seconds later. And V2 was calculated at 162 knots IAS, and this was easily achieved as the recorded airspeed 3 seconds after takeoff at 08:08:42 was 180 knots IAS, and an acceleration from 153 knots to 180 knots in 9 seconds is perfectly normal. Any slow acceleration on the runway during the roll soon disappeared when the aircraft was airborne.
So, Richard, what about an engine inoperative after takeoff?
Well, let me introduce the viewers to aviation language and acronyms. There's quite a lot of it. The certification and performance language from ICAO, FAA, and the equipment manufacturers is AEO, all engines operating, OEI, one engine inoperative, and an aircraft must meet the OEI for certification, and then AEI, all engines inoperative. And in the training language, they talk about a SEFATO, SEFATO, scheduled engine failure after takeoff, and they talk about a DFATO, demonstrated engine failure after takeoff. And these are the performance tests, versus the book data, and they make the distinction. In other words, what do the designers say versus what does the aircraft actually do? And in the training and operational language, the EFATO, engine flame out after takeoff, that's a standard simulator training exercise. And they do the CVATO at the single engine flame out after takeoff, and all pilots are trained to handle that event. But what they do not do on a regular basis is the DFATO, the dual engine flame out after takeoff. And pilots are not trained and regularly tested in a simulator to handle an all engines inoperative situation. And so the miracle of the Hudson River really was a miracle because the captain used his glider training and his pilot training and skillfully landed the aircraft safely on the Hudson River.
And for those who don't know, the captain, Sully Sullenberger, was actually a US Navy fighter pilot flying F-14s and other high-performance aircraft onto an aircraft carrier. So a very skilled, very, very skilled pilot.
Yeah.
Now, Richard, Airbus gives us some wonderful mathematical numbers to get our head around when it comes to the reliability of jet engines. And I love this particular book from Airbus. So back in 1989, Airbus published a booklet called ETOPS, Twins Through Time, which was designed to sell the safety of its new twin-engined A330. At the time, the two power plants it was selling on the A330 were GE's CF680 and the Pratt& Whitney JT9D 7R4. Now, just to stop for a second, these two engines were the first the first of the new high bypass engines. They powered the DC-10, the 747, and the Rolls equivalent powered the Lockheed TriStar. So they're first generation high bypass engines. Now, the in-flight shutdown IFD rate for these was 0.04 and 0.08 per 1,000 flight hours, respectively. Hold on to that number. At the time, Airbus then calculated, under ETOPS rules for 180-minute diversion from the nearest airport, the A330 would have to fly back to when the Sahara Desert was a lush grassland, that's 10,000 years, before it lost both engines for independent causes. That's very important, independent causes. If you were to apply the 120-minute diversion rule, the distance blows out to 18,000 years. That's the Ice Age. Incredible numbers for an in-flight shutdown rate of approximately 0.05 per 1,000 flights. But current engines make that number look positively unsafe, boasting an in-flight shutdown record of 0.001 per 1,000 flights. And that's for the GE90 and the GENX. The GE90 is on the 777 and the GENX is on the 787. Richard, pretty impressive numbers.
Yes, they are indeed. And ETOPS originally stood for Extended Range Twin Engine Operations, and the rules that allowed twin-engine aircraft to fly routes with more than 60 minutes diversion time to the nearest airport. And now ETOPS just simply stands for Extended Range Operations, and it covers twin, 3, or 4-engine aircraft. There are currently no 3-engine aircraft being built. There are a few 4-engine aircraft, and they're in the niche markets of civil cargo and military heavy lift aircraft. So the ETOPS book from Airbus back in 1989 was basically pushing back against the strong 4 engines for long haul lobby. That was Boeing 747 and the Douglas DC-10 and MD-11 supporters, who were against the reliability considerations for using twin engine aircraft. Now, that's long since gone with the Boeing 777 and the 787 and the A350. And we've come a long way since 1989. And we're no longer talking about 10,000 years going back to the Sahara being green, or 18,000 years going back to the Ice Age. We're now talking about 47.6 million years going back beyond human history. And the ETOPS 330 is what the Boeing 787 and with the GE NX-1B engines is certified for. So no longer 120 or 180 or 240. We're now up to ETOPS 330. And even if you were operating a fleet of 100 aircraft and they were all doing 3,500 flight hours a year, you will not experience an independent dual engine shutdown in 260,000 years. I don't know about your history, but when I go back on the human history, the Homo sapiens, anatomically, modern humans, meaning people with the same physical form as us today, appeared about 200,000 or 300,000 years ago in Africa. So a dual engine shutdown in flight is extraordinarily rare. And when it occurs, it usually points to a common cause factor, not an independent failure. And given the elimination of bird strike and fuel contamination and deliberate crew action, and given that both engines were successfully relit, and pending further investigation, the most plausible explanation is a dual engine shutdown with a common cause. And that is what we have presented in our previous episodes.
Mm. The acronym ETOPS was, when it came out, some folks that were not too thrilled with the idea, they said it stood for engines turning or passengers swimming. And and for those who don't know, this was all about enabling aircraft to fly more direct routes across the Atlantic, and then across the North Pacific, and then it's gone on from there, where you've got to have a diversion airport. Now, the started off with 60 minutes, then went into 90, then it went to 120, and so we're talking about 120 minutes flying away from an airport. And as Richard said, it's now out to 330 minutes, which means an aeroplane can fly, say, from Perth, where I am, down in the Southern Ocean. It can fly to Rio de Janeiro over the South Pole. Twin-engine aircraft can do that because it meets that 330-minute diversion. But more than the engine now, Richard, it's all about things like fire suppression in the cargo hold. And there's a whole raft of things that the aircraft must be able to sustain life for the passengers for a long diversion at a lower altitude if they lose an engine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've come a long way in recent years, and I think we just want to bring out the statistics in support of the issue that we perceive with the Air India crash
Yeah.
and how rare an event that is. And I think it's telling that the only uh, issue with a previous Air India 787 turned out to be a maintenance issue, and going back 5 years previously in the maintenance history. So I think that explains why we've been very carefully going through the maintenance history in India in recent episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed for crunching those numbers today. That was,
Yeah,
they're really amazing, and thank you very much indeed. And one thing we
you're
should also
welcome.
mention,
Yeah.
typically if there's an engine failure, it's going to happen about 10 minutes after within takeoff, and you just go back to the airport and land. So that's typically when you have an engine failure, if you do have one. But again, thank you, Richard. Viewers, we're going to be back tomorrow, and we look forward to your company. So please subscribe to us. Please do like us. Please join our community. Keep those wonderful comments coming. Keep those great questions coming. As I've said before, we do read them all. We do appreciate them very much indeed, and we just love the support that you're giving us. It's absolutely fabulous. So wherever you are in the world, have a good evening or have a good morning, and we look forward to your company tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you very much.